Happy Friday.
So here's how this goes. I introduce you, and then I'm going to ask you some questions, and we're going to yap about leadership.
Okay.
All right, so if you've known me for any length of time since I moved to Fargo, you've probably heard me talk about the importance of places where connection actually happens, where community is not just talked about but built. For me, one of those places has always been the Red River Valley Fair. It is, in part, where this story begins because that is where I first met Zachary. Over the past 2 seasons, my husband Patrick has worked closely with West Fargo United girls wrestling, and through that proximity, I've had the chance to observe something that is increasingly rare: leadership. Leadership. End of sentence, actually. I've learned a lot about wrestling, but far more about Zachary, not because he's particularly chatty, he's not, but because his actions are unmistakably consistent with his values. At a time when so many conversations circle around the erosion of standards, where effort is negotiable, where resilience is optional, Zachary stands in stark contrast. He does not bypass difficulty, he leans into it. He expects more, not just from his athletes, but from himself. More importantly, he understands that standards are not about control, they're about care, about preparing people for what comes next. Zachary is a 16-year Army veteran, currently serving as a company first sergeant for U.S. Army recruiting across North and South Dakota. He's also the head coach of West Fargo United girls wrestling, where he's been building not just a program, but a culture, one rooted in accountability, discipline, and belief. He holds a degree in human resource management, but more than that, he lives out what it means to invest in people every day. He's a husband, a father to 2 children, and a foster parent, expanding the same commitment to growth and stability into his home. What I respect most is this: Zachary owns both the hard and the good. He does not separate outcomes from responsibility, and he takes the work of shaping people, young athletes, future leaders, more seriously than almost anyone I've ever encountered. So tonight is not really a conversation about wrestling. It's a conversation about standards. It's about leadership. It's about what becomes possible when someone is willing to do the steady work of building something that lasts. And I'm honored to introduce you to my friend, Zachary. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, when you think about the word leadership, what does it mean to you?
Oh, man. For me, it really depends on the space that I'm in, right? Being in the Army for as long as I have, obviously it is a staple and a cornerstone of that organization. But leadership in the military is a lot different, I found, as far than leadership in the civilian sector. And then even more so, it's different when we get into the athletic and the sports world. But I mean, consistently across all spectrums, it is really just holding myself accountable, holding subordinates accountable, athletes accountable, and really just kind of knowing the difference between leadership and likership, setting standards and holding everyone to those standards, including myself, regardless of how we feel about, it could be soldiers, it could be 16-year-old girl wrestlers, it could be, employees, whatever the case may be. And that's something I've learned over the years, is stepping out of the Army bubble and kind of expanding those skills outside, especially because coming up here at the end of my Army career here soon. So we're really looking to step off that cliff and kind of explore that in different spaces.
Did you say the difference between leadership and likership?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So I think a lot of people get leadership and likership confused, or they don't know how to split the two. And I think that there's a space where both of those can live in harmony together. I would say that in my wrestling room, they are very, very closely related, because I'm dealing with anywhere from 12-year-old to 17-year-old teenage girls, in one of the hardest sports in the world. And these kids have to like me. They don't have to respect me. They do not have to listen to me. They can walk out of that room any point that they want, right? Regardless of whether the standards that I set for them are acceptable. They just don't have to do it. Whereas in the military, you do have to do what I tell you to do, right? Your paycheck, where you live, your benefits are directly tied to you doing exactly what I tell you to do and living up to the standards that I set for you. So when we look at the difference between leadership and likership in the military spectrum, I don't have to care if you like me. I we're going to take care of you, right? And you may not like how we take care of you, but we are going to take care of you. And I think that depending on where you work in the civilian sector, it could be both ways as well. Just kind of depending on the demographic of your subordinates and the position that you hold. But it's hard to keep yourself accountable when you are trying so hard to lead a team, mentor a team, and still have them like you. It's almost impossible, and it's not going to happen in most cases.
Is that so? Like, obviously, you're a human, and you were a human before you joined the Army. You're a human throughout your time in the Army. What was that a hard transition for you from Army to coach? In that, like, you can walk out of this room whenever you want to. Like, how? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the military is very, very transparent, or at least the Army is, right? If you do this, this will happen.
Yeah.
If you don't do this, this will happen, right? If you ask me for this, I will get it for you, and it will happen in this time period, in these steps, right? And we're transparent with our soldiers from the very beginning. You never know you never have to guess when you're getting a promotion. Right? If you do these 3 things, you're going to get promoted. If you do these 3 things, you're going to get to have that position, whatever the case may be. And I don't think that is like that in the civilian sector, not at least the way I've seen it. A lot, even very, very successful large companies, a lot of employees that work in these places, they don't know when they're getting promoted. They can guess. They'd be like, well, I think I'm really doing a good job, but I don't know what my boss actually thinks. I don't know what my HR actually thinks. And I don't know what that timeline looks like. So when I step out of the military and I go into the civilian space, one, as a leader, I try really hard to be transparent as possible with the teams that I work with and the subordinates I work with, because they deserve to know. And I think in the civilian space, so many people are used to just not knowing where the direction that they're headed. Or even what the standards and expectations of their leaders are, or their organization. There's a lot of times I ask civilian employees, like, well, what's your company's mission statement? They're like, I don't know. Right. That's crazy to me. Right. But it's because I've been in the Army so long that it's unacceptable to not know the direction that we're going in the mission set that is tasked to you. So, yeah, it's been a huge learning curve. It was really interesting when I was finishing up my degree. It was funny because one of our capstone courses, they were talking about what the fundamental tasks of a very successful company would be. And some of those tasks would be like annual reviews for every employee, planning meetings for new hires. Where do you want to be in 3 years? Where do you want to be in 6 months? What do we need to help you get there? And what do we expect of you if we give that to you? Right. And it was interesting because what they said in there is that they're finding that like 90% of companies out there do not do these things. And I laughed because I've been forced to do it since I was 17. And we complain about it. Right. Every time it's time for our annual review, we're like, oh my God, I got to go do this annual review with my boss, because I've been doing it every year since I was 17. And it's funny because when we go into the civilian sector, people are yearning for these things. They want to be mentored. They want to be coached. They want to be led. They want to be reviewed. And it's not happening. So, yeah, when I step into that civilian space, I'm really making sure that I'm bringing some of those practices across the line. Because our subordinates and our teams deserve that.
This is this was not supposed to be the most soothing conversation of my life, but I'm not surprised that it is. So I'm adopted. Both my adopted father and my biological father served in the military, in the Army specifically. And my dad, who raised me, returned to civilian life and served as a higher education academic administrative leader. And so all of these things that have felt like, tenets of his leadership style that have been so important to what I would perceive as his success, the organizations he led, their success, my success, because I just perceived them as the normative expectation of leadership. And to hear someone talk about how absent they are is validating, alarming, but validating to my experience of like, why is this not understood?
Yep. Yep.
So another word that you used, I want to talk about words because I think words are really important. And there are two you used that I want to talk about. The first one I want to talk about is accountability. And so when I think about someone saying, well, it's really important for a leader to be accountable, what does that mean to you? And how do you show accountability? How do you lead in accountability in the spaces that you occupy?
Yeah. So again, I think that comes back to transparency. You can't work successfully for me or for the organization if you don't know what the expectations are, right? You can try and you can guess. And there's a lot of positions in which people get thrown into and they're like, well, I think this is what success looks like. And I think this is what a good job looks like. But if it's not on paper and you haven't had that conversation, then there's no way for you to know. So that is something I do with my athletes, right? The first day of practice, we have a contract and it is created by me and a couple of my assistant coaches. We revise it every year. I usually have other coaches from other sports look over it. I usually have parents take a look at it just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. And we send it home with the athletes on the first day of practice. And they have to sign it. Their parents have to sign it. And they are not allowed in the room on day 2 of practice if they do not walk in with the signed copy. And they cannot come to the next practice until they walk in with a signed copy.
Yep.
Because what will happen is when I do have to run into an issue with that athlete, I'm going to pull that back out of a filing cabinet and be like, well, you signed this. Your parents signed this. You know what the expectation is. And that's holding them accountable. But I also have to be accountable for enforcing it. Because if I'm not, it just sets the standard. It lowers the bar to raise the standard, right? And then I have a room full of people who it doesn't matter what they sign and it doesn't matter what they look like if I'm not holding myself accountable and holding them accountable in the same space. So
is that uncommon in a coaching space, in a team space, or is that something other people do?
I think it's uncommon in the high school level. It's very common in the college level, especially now with NIL and stuff like that. Like when you involve money, there's always going to be some kind of left and right limit on paper. In the high school space, I don't think it's very common. The reason that I think it's so important to do it in my specific situation is because I am not creating really, really good girl wrestlers. I am creating young women professionals who are going to leave high school, and most of them never wrestle again after they graduate. And we're not necessarily teaching them wrestling. We are, but the deeper meaning is that you are going to go out and be a leader in a world where it is no longer a world where you're expected just to marry and be at home, and you are expected to go out and get that job and get that degree and chase those careers and chase those promotions and be the breadwinner as a female. And so we owe it to them, especially as leaders in the extracurricular activities, to prepare them for that. And that expectation is that if you are going to be in these spaces, you are going to have responsibilities and you are going to be held to a standard, and you need to exceed the standard in everything you do. And that could be starting with making your bed and doing the dishes, all the way to, signing up for scholarships. Like our seniors, every time they walk in the room, because it's a winter sport, right? So we're looking towards the spring, right? And I have seniors that walk in, and every day we walk in, how many scholarships did you fill out today? None. All right, that's fine. You're going to run a couple extra laps, and then tomorrow you're going to have 2 filled out, right? That's what it's going to be, right? Because that is our job, and they may not like it, but that's fine. Because we're going to take care of you. Again, you may not like how we take care of you, but we are going to take care of you, and that's just the way it's going to be if you're going to be in my room.
Well, and you signed a contract. You communicated. You were transparent about the culture of accountability you were creating. I have a lot of thoughts about that I really appreciate. What we're building, what we're growing is not an elite high school wrestler. Like this is a period of time where you are here right now. It's not a permanent status. And so we're preparing you for more than that, which I think is important. I think one of the things that's interesting to me about the way that you talk about accountability, the way you talk about transparency, like if you don't know where you're going, if you don't know how to be successful, I don't think I have thought about leadership as an accessibility tool. But functionally, what we're describing is if you grew up in a home, in a corporate home, um, in a home where standards or business or corporate movement was normal or talked about, but you enter a workspace where it's not clearly communicated, there is a clear disparity and inequitability of how your staff navigate that space. And so I appreciate you pointing that out because I don't think that's how we often look at it. And we talk about first generation college students and how to help them navigate that space that is unfamiliar. I don't feel like I've heard people talk about that in a corporate space or in any other context where you're trying to assess what the goal is, what the mission is, what the target is, what your expectations are, and that if we as leaders are not helpful in helping you navigate that space, there will be a disparity between who succeeds and who fails.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the one thing that I kind of learned too, moving from the military space to the civilian space, was as leaders in the Army, we not only do we have the job to do that we're doing, 9 to 5, but I'm also responsible for your financial well-being, your marriage, your children's health, um, what decisions you're making on the outside. That is something that people don't really understand, who don't understand the military space, is that if you have a leader, they are responsible for your entire not life. There is no clocking out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big difference I think that we see in the civilian employment space, is that you may be a great leader or mentor or both at work, but at 5 o'clock, when everybody clocks out, your leadership time ends. And that's not how it is for us. And we can only stretch ourselves so far. However, I don't think that you have the full scope of what it means to be a leader if you are not drawing in the personal side, the private side. Not everybody wants to share everything either, and that's not necessarily something that's required in the civilian sector, where it is required for us in the military. Right. But if you don't know what home that employee is coming from, if you don't know what financial situation that employee is coming from, if you don't know what's going on in their background, how can you ever expect to set realistic expectations for them and also expect to make a plan for them to succeed? Because what you're effectively doing is taking your cookie cutter leadership model, and you're applying it to 16, 17, 30 different human beings and expecting it to work, and then calling yourself a good leader. And that's just not true. And that kind of dives into the mentorship piece as well. But
yeah,
realistically, like, you have to know more than just what these people do at work. And that's something we do. I mean, we're forced to in the middle. I have to show my leadership my bank account, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have to go out and inspect my personal vehicle. Like, they have to know everything. They have to know my kids' birthdays and when my wife and I got married, and they have to know everything, whether we're in counseling or what have you. All that gets reported. And so your leadership in the Army knows you better than anybody, probably knows you better than your family. And so that's what creates such strong leaders in the Army when they come out of it. And when they come to the civilian space, I think they're shocked to find out, like, I don't have to know anything about these people. I'm not expected to know anything about these people. I'm just expected to make sure they get the job done. And that's not leadership. That's being a boss, right?
Yep.
And you could be very good at it, but it's not the same thing.
It's probably the clearest way to genuinely articulate the difference between a leader and a boss. And like, I think, I've already said this once, words are important. And so I think a question, I'm going to go back to the next word, and then I'm going to come back to a little bit about what you just said there. One of the things that is talked about a lot in boss, corporate, hierarchy spaces is like, well, I can't be transparent because, like, there are things people shouldn't know. And like I do think that is a cop out. I don't think anybody really thinks I'm asking you to show me your proprietary information. So I think that is used, just admittedly, as an excuse. But can you give me an example of what transparency looks like? And I would say specifically in this girls wrestling space, like you are dealing with minors in high school on a team. This is not a corporate structure. This is not someone's job. This is not even an adult. Can you give me an example of how you model transparency in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, obviously they're all. I have seventh graders through seniors, right? So that age range goes from 12-year-olds to sometimes 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
And they all come from different families. They all come from very different situations, financially, emotionally, whatever the case may be. But what is the same for every single one of them is the brutality of the real world when they leave, right? I think that we do a very good in our quest to protect emotional health. We kind of shield them from what the reality is when they leave that high school space.
Mm-hmm.
And we tell them, and all the things that are true. You're worth it. That you know, everything that you do is valid. That your emotions are valid, and everything, your trauma that you've gone through in the past is valid, right? And all those things are real things. But what they don't tell these girls is that when they leave, nobody cares. And so we are very transparent with them on the team that we love you and we support you and we will be here for you for everything you need. However, you have to understand that just like on the mat, when you leave, that person competing with you does not care, right? And so if you're a seventh grade girl and you weigh 112 pounds and you've never wrestled before and you go out there and there's some senior out there that's been wrestling since she was 4, she don't care. And her coach doesn't care. And she's going to go out there and she's going to absolutely torch you. And she's going to embarrass you and she's going to shove your face in the mat and it's going to be a whole thing. And it is a perfect segue into what we are trying to prepare them for when they leave. When you go to college, like you don't get to make up tests. You don't get to make up essays. Either you hand it in on time or you don't, right? And when you go to work, you don't get to take a mental health day. Like you will be fired immediately, right? And so that's really where what we try to instill in these kids is being transparent with them. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that, oh yeah, you're going to go to college and they're going to let you do whatever you want and you're going to find a job. That's not true. It's not going to happen. And we don't treat them that way in the room. We treat them with reality, the respect that they deserve. And part of that respect is the truth. And I don't think that in a lot of cases we are being truthful and honest with this next generation in the way that we treat them and the way that we handle them with gloves on.
Yeah. Yeah. Knowing that of course the army is its own entity and that, someone's not going to be able to walk into ABCDE corporate job and say, I need to see your bank account, I want to inspect your card, tell me about your kid's birthday. Like that is a structure that exists within the army that is its own thing. How does somebody take on any part of that as a leader and say, how do you get to know your team and your people outside of a structure that says do that, while still bringing in the ability to kind of learn and lead the whole person?
Yeah. So I think it starts with you have to earn buy-in from your team. Like they can listen to you and they can do what you tell them to because they're the assigned, boss by position. But if they're not bought in, you're never going to know anything about them, right? And I think that starts with really learning who your team is. I think that's a big reason that like these entrance interviews after somebody's hired, like you should be sitting down with a new employee as their first line, leader and being like, hey, like I'm your boss. This is your job. This is what we expect. This is a little bit about me, where I came from, what I do. Tell me what do you expect to get out of this, right? What are you trying to get? And be honest, like because there's always smoke screens. You're always gonna get the same answer. Well, I really thought this was a good opportunity for my career, and I think that a little extra money for save up for vacation. No. What do you want?
Yeah.
right? And when you really dig and get through the smoke screens, you find out, well, I'm trying to prove to myself that I can do this, right? Or my husband lost his job, or my wife lost her job, and now it's my responsibility to, take on the role of head of household. I haven't done it for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever the case may be. And when you find out those things, you don't need to know everything about them, but you do need to know their ultimate buying motive. And if you don't, they're not going to be bought into you. You're not going to be bought into them. And you will never get the full potential out of them. And so I think people who try to engender that buy-in do it in a way they're like, oh, well, I'm going to let you get away with this, and I'm going to buy the team pizza. And it's really not what engenders buy-in. And people get very, very surprised to find that actually holding people accountable and holding to a standard will actually buy you more buy-in than all the other fluff, right? If I tell you, like, hey, I absolutely expect you to have this done because I know that you can.
Yeah.
Right. I expect this to hit this deadline because I know that you can. I actually know that you can do it better. But I just want to see where we are at with this kind of expectation. And when people start hitting those, and the validation within themselves is something you can never buy. And they will thank you for it. At the end of the day, they will thank you for it. It may be growing pains, but when they leave that organization, or when they get promoted, or when they get a team of their own, they will think back and be like, man, like, I needed that.
Yeah.
That was something I learned kind of earlier in my Army career. I had gotten in trouble for something, and it really wasn't my fault, but I had a leader who told me, like, hey, because of this, I'm going to make sure that you don't get promoted for at least a year. And I was like, I hated him for years for it. Even after I left that unit and that command and I went on, I was like, I hated him for it. And then years later, it wasn't until that I had my own teams and I kind of ran into those situations, and I thought, and I was like, man, like, I needed that. I didn't know it, but I needed it. And I did call him, and by then he had been out of the Army for years, but I called him and I was like, hey, I just want you to know, like, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. And it took me 5 years to figure it out, but I did need it. And that is something that I think people are afraid to push that envelope. And they're like, well, I'm not trying to hurt people's feelings. I'm trying to do this. I'm not trying to do that. And it's like, well, at the end of the day, we do have a job. We do have a mission. Part of that is, taking care of you, but we also have the organization's mission. And it's always, for me, it's always, family first, mission always. Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to take care of you, but we got to get the job done. And I'm going to make sure that you are best well equipped to do that within the skill sets that you have. Right. And then we build on that.
And I think that comes back for me a little bit back to that leadership likership thing. Like, I think people are quick to say, people want to work with someone they like. Like, no, you need to be liked, or you want to be liked, and that you are going to sacrifice ultimately the mission, but the project, the relationship, the person, their future growth, success, and goals, because you're not willing to say something that you think might make them in this moment like you less. Yep. And I think that is, like, you lose so much in that space. And I think there is this need, if you're going to be a leader and not just a boss, are you tough enough to think this person might not today like me the most? Which is funny, because when I come back to that, like, first interview, first conversation of, like, what are you looking to get out of this? What am I doing? Like, you never said in that conversation, like, back to transparency, you never said in that conversation, I really need you to like me.
Yep.
And so there's actually a little bit of a false premise, because I think even if a staff is coming into that space with any, wherewithal, that is actually a huge thing a lot of bosses should be saying in their opening conversation. Because if you told this person, I want to see you grow, I want to see you succeed, but if and only if I can do so while you like me, like, that would be a huge red flag. But that is honestly the context most people are operating in.
Yep. Well, and I think a lot of people also get liking me and respecting me twisted, right? One of my boss here, in my normal job, he has very high standards, right? And he holds us to a very high standard, and he is not afraid to call me and absolutely torch me, right? But I know him well enough to know that after he does that, if I wait about 2 hours, I'm gonna get another phone call, and it's gonna be like, all right, now that we've gotten that over with, we're gonna learn, right? And as much as I hate the first phone call, I really always look forward to the second one.
Yeah.
Right. Because if I'm in that situation, it's because I made a mistake, right? And I'm gonna make mistakes, right? We're not perfect. But I really dislike him during that first conversation. But I know that I'm really gonna like him at the end of the second one.
Yeah.
And that's just how that relationship is. And he doesn't demand that I like him, but inherently I do. Because he is holding me to a standard, and he is teaching me, and he is developing me. But I think the other issue too is that we expect a lot of times when we are in these leadership positions and we are in these higher positions, we expect our subordinates to care as much as we do about the organization, and they never will. They just never will. And we can't expect that they are going to care as much as we do, because they're never getting the same thing out of it as we are.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I am, it doesn't matter if it's the military or the civilian sector, if I am in a position of leadership and trust, when my team wins, I'm always going to get more perks from the organization than my team members will. Always. Because my success rides on the backs of your successes in your work. So for me to expect you to care as much about the work as I do is unrealistic. So I have to set my expectations in a way that, one, you expect that you are going to get rewarded at the level that you should. And two, know that your energy is going to, the energy you put in is directly going to match what you expect to get out of it.
Yep.
Right? Nobody works for somebody and is like, oh, I can't wait to get my boss a pat on the back. Like I can't wait for my boss's boss to tell him he did a good job. I'm going to do this. Nobody does that. And if you say that you're doing it, you're lying, because unless your supervisor is your direct relative or your spouse or your best friend, you would never work that hard to get them gratification for your work. So as leaders, we have to understand that, and we can hold them to a high standard, but we also have to understand, like, you're not getting the perks that I'm getting for our successes as a team. And I think that goes across all spaces when there's a hierarchy.
Well, and I think like there's like a whole context here of honesty. Like an org chart exists, and you can assume that if you report up to me, I'm making more than you. And whether that is perks, salary, whatever, doesn't matter. It is what it is. And like, so I would add to what you said and say, like, it's not only are you not going to care as much, it is inappropriate for me to think you do. Like, it is dishonest, disillusioned, inappropriate, because you're the leader. And so to think that anybody who reports up to you is holding the knowledge, the information, the access, whatever, the resources. So again, whether that is salary, benefit, perk, I don't care. It's not, you're not peers for a reason. And so again, I come back to, like, no one comes into this and says, I expect you to act like you're earning and knowing the things that I'm earning and knowing. Like, there's a level of delusion that requires, and it's not how humans work. It's not how organizations work. It's not how reality works. And so I appreciate all of that immensely. One of the things I've been thinking about across society, humanity, is this erosion of standards. And you talked a little bit about, like, not preparing the next generation, like handling the next generation like we have gloves on. The world is brutal. People expect less and less of themselves and everyone else around them. How do you kind of really tangibly try to reinstill the need for a personal standard?
Yeah. So what I tell my athletes is that the winners are the people who will do the things that they most don't want to do. Right. And again, that starts with making your bed in the morning. That starts with, you know, doing your homework when you're not asked to, or that paper's not due till Friday, so I write it on Monday. Right. And what I really try to get them to understand is that if you get in the habit of doing the things you most do not want to do, you will, the dividends are crazy. Like you can't even fathom the amount of payoff that comes with that. And so when you start to see those dividends and you start to see those rewards pay off, that shot of a little bit of confidence is, it drives the whole process. But we have to get there first, right? So holding yourself personally accountable not only is because I owe you as your leader, I owe you the training and the development and the care to outpace me someday, right? And if I'm going to do that, you also owe it to yourself to outwork yourself. And so if I'm going to put that time and effort into you, I expect you to put that time and effort into you. And when you start seeing those dividends pay off, I expect you to find somebody else that used to be in your position and you pass that along. And you're never going to be able to do that if you don't hold yourself to a standard. And that's not only the work standard, but if I am going to love you, you need to love you as much as I do as well. And I think that lately we get away from that. It's so easy for us to tell this younger generation and be like, well, it's okay if you hate yourself. It's okay if you don't love yourself. It's okay to lay in bed all day and feel sorry for yourself. And but it's not okay, right? Because not only do you owe yourself greatness, but there is another younger you that you are going to run across someday and you owe them answers. That's just who we are as human beings and as a society, is that if you are going to win, even little wins, you owe those lessons to somebody else coming behind you. And what I tell people all the time, especially when it came to when we were deciding to foster, it was the conversation that I had with my wife and some other people I talked about is like, if I can, I should.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, and that doesn't apply to everything. I'm not going to help every single person with every single task. But in some of these situations where it comes to somebody in need or somebody who needs training or development or whatever, if I can, I'm going to. Right. And that's really, really how we live and how we try to operate in my household, in our wrestling room, in, in my battalion. So that's we're always going to push that mantra, right? And that rolls downhill is when I get you, I promise you I'll get you to this space, but I expect you to bring somebody up with you, right? And then I expect that person to bring somebody up with them. And in organizations that do that well, those organizations are the ones that are undoubtedly on top in every metric, whether when it comes to revenue or it comes to culture or it comes to employee turnover. When you have leadership within the ranks that aren't necessarily leaders, you're always going to see an organization win.
And I want to clarify for anyone listening, because I think it's important to acknowledge, like, if you helped everybody with everything, it doesn't balance. So I think there's a need to assess availability, opportunity. I can do this. I cannot do everything, but I can do this, because you cease to be helpful to the people you are obligated
Yep.
to. And so I think that is an important add. And at the same time, like, what you're talking about is clearly this understanding that, like, we're all connected and responsible for and to each other. Like, and this is what it means to be a part of a society or a team or. Like, fundamentally, when you sell yourself short, you are selling everyone around you short because you have less capacity. And so I think a word that you're illustrating here so beautifully is capacity. You don't gain capacity by laying in bed all day.
Yep.
And so, like,
Yep.
to whom do you owe blank? Who, I think about obligation in this sense. And I think this is probably just another reality of the life and times in which we live, where I think the word obligation is viewed so negatively. Like, I don't want to be obliged to you. I don't want the obligation. And, like, there is a beauty to the concept of obligation because it means I'm not going to leave you behind.
Yep.
And, like, I don't want to live in a world where we demonize the concept of obligation. Like, that
Yep.
is a scary place to be.
Yep. Well, and selfishly, I've learned more from subordinates than I have ever from leaders, right? So selfishly, the more people that I take under the wing and the more people that I bring up, the better I get, right? And the more I learn. I've never it's not that I haven't learned from leaders, but the things that stick with me the most, the things that make me good at my jobs, I learn from subordinates. And that could, again, like, I have learned so much from, if you had told me I would learn all these lessons from 16-year-old girls, like, I'd tell you you're crazy, right? But they teach us things, especially when it comes to some of our biases and what we think of across generations and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, like, I have talks with these kids as parents, and I find out very quickly that they don't actually know their kids.
Uh-huh.
Um, which is kind of shocking because I only spend 2 hours a day with them, right? And 12 hours on a Saturday. Um, but when you take away your biases and you start really looking at the bigger picture and looking at from a different lens, more so on their level as opposed to somewhere above them, you really start peeling back the onion and realizing, like, oh, there's things I can learn from this, and there are things that I can take away from this. And that's the same thing in the Army. I've learned more things from brand new 17-year-old privates than I've ever learned from, a field grade officer or what have you, because one, this generation has so much to bring to the table. Like, they have so much more knowledge than any of us ever had. They have more access to information than any of us ever have. But their opportunities to share it is extremely limited, especially in the workspace,
Mm-hmm.
because they're discounted heavily right off the bat as just whatever they are, right? Whether it be lazy or they don't know enough or they're just starting out or whatever. And if you take the time to get to know them, they can take your organization levels. But you have to be the person and the leader who's willing to have that conversation and invest in those kind of things. So,
You have to invest in them, but you have to be humble enough to see them too. And, like, I
yep,
think just in an absolute agreement with what you just said, I have said this privately, I will say it publicly. Everyone I have ever worked with is smarter than everyone I have ever worked for.
yep,
And I think there is this, like, in the last team that I was leading, I hired two 22-year-olds. And it is incredibly frustrating for me when I hear people talk about, like, oh, you can't work with this next generation. They don't want to show up. They don't. I think there is a lot of self-protection in the dialogue we're creating in that space because I would pick both of them over most people I have worked with with no qualification, like, of what I mean when I say that. And so I think that there is, like, it comes back to, like, who are you bringing with you? Like, I have an obligation to invest in the next generation who I see as talented, smart, informed, passionate. The list goes on and on. But who is showing up for them? Because they're on LinkedIn too. They're on Instagram too. They're wherever people are talking about the next generation, they're there and they are hearing how you talk about them. And I would just be careful. Like, I'm
yep,
pretty sure it's a Cat Williams skit that's like, you can walk into the club and say whatever you want to, but you cannot then walk out of the club. Like, we are connected. This is a shared narrative. Like, we belong to each other. And so I do think, like, I'm going to come back to, like, laying in bed. Like, you can't inform the next generation. You cannot empower the next generation if you do not know and are not engaged in the realities of their lives.
yep. And you will never be a great leader if you are not willing to learn. And I think a lot of people who claim that they're in leadership positions or claim that they're great leaders believe that they know everything that there is to know about their space. And the first, if you've not had great leaders, and the first time you hear one go, well, I might be wrong, you know, tell me what you think, right? It's kind of like shocking because you're all of a sudden like, well, you want my opinion, right?
Yep.
And instantly, even, and I won't lie, like I do this on purpose, right? Sometimes, but that person instantly has buy-in, right? Because now you've given them stake in whatever we're talking about. Whether it could be a small project, it could be the bottom line of the company, it could be whatever the case may be. But I'm giving you ownership. There's a lot of times, like in the Army, where one of the tactics to fix a ineffective soldier is to give them responsibility, is to promote them. And people think that's crazy when I tell them that. And I was like, yeah, well, sometimes we have a soldier who never comes to work on time and, has a problem with alcohol or has been in a couple of fights or whatever the case may be. We'll just promote them. They're like, why in the world would you do that? I was like, because you'd be amazed what happens when you give them a job and give them responsibilities and give them autonomy to lead in the way that they think is best. And they will just decide on their own that, oh, I'm setting standards for myself now. Oh, I'm going, this is where I want to be because somebody gave me a chance. And I think that's a big thing too. I saw something on Instagram the other day that said, success is not earned, it's given. Somebody looked at you and said, that one. And that's true, right? Like we can grind as hard as we want, but somebody who is in the space that you want to be has to choose you.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we do that for soldiers, and I've done it on my team as well, I have given captaincy to someone that they just were showing me the opposite of everything I wanted to see in a captain. And all of a sudden you give them the captaincy, and all of a sudden 2 weeks later we see this person who is always on time and holding other girls accountable and working really hard and eating right and all these things. And I've been struggling with this person for 3 years. So it's multi-level and it's multifunctional, and we have to be able to have the skills to explore that as leaders and know that, like, I'm not always right. And there are other ways to handle this, and there are always other ways to solve this. And luckily I have a huge network of really, really great leaders and mentors, and I call them all the time. Like, what do you think about this? I'm about to do this. What do you think? Or I've got the secret, and you can't do it on your own. And if you think that you can, you're crazy.
Yes. One of my, I think sometimes it would be helpful if the concepts we talk about could be visualized. And I think about the fact that, like, I really wish this person would show more ownership. I really wish this person would show more responsibility. I really wish this person would take initiative. And, like, I want you to understand that everything you're talking about, if you drew it, and we're looking, like, if there's a whiteboard in your room and, like, here is your employee that you wish they would take initiative or have ownership or take responsibility, and then draw what those things look like, and then decide who's actually holding them.
Yep.
Because an employee cannot take responsibility if responsibility has not been given. Someone cannot show ownership where ownership has not been given. Someone cannot take initiative when the initiative is free for the taking. And so I think that those concepts, in many senses, like, we have to bring them down. Like, these are not the world's most abstract constructs. Like, there really is a reality wherein I think 9 times out of 10, I feel safe saying, when somebody says about an employee or a subordinate, they're not taking responsibility. I want you to illustrate for me where you gave it to them to take.
So you're not going to take responsibility for something if you don't know what the payoff is, right? So a lot of times we have to show them, well, if you were to do this, this is what's going to happen, and this is why it's positive, right? And I tell this story a lot when we're talking about this in different spaces. When I was a kid, obviously you can see behind me, like I'm an outdoorsman, right? I grew up with a dad who's an outdoorsman. Like, we hunting and fishing, trapping, that was a big thing when I was growing up. But until I was about 8, I carried a wooden gun. And it was basically a 2x4 that my dad had cut into the shape of a gun. And it was heavy. And I knew it didn't do anything. And he made me carry that for years. And I hated it. I hated hunting until I turned 9 and I got my first gun and I got my first bird. And then I was hooked. But until I actually was successful and saw the fruits of my labor, I didn't care. It was like the worst thing in the world. I did not want to go. Every time he's like, we're going to go hunting, I was like, here's your wooden gun. Carry it, right? And we'd walk for miles, and I hated it. And I mean, now it's like, it's the biggest part of my life, and it's the biggest part of my kids' lives. And like, but it showed me at a very young age that you have to know what you're working for, and you have to have that little taste. And so as leaders, we have to give them that taste. And it may be as simple as just showing them, like, well, look, and so they started where you're starting, and now they're here, and this is the perks that they have, and these are the things that they have. But nobody is coming to work for free. Nobody. Like, everyone, I hear people all the time, like, I love my job. No, you don't. Because if I asked you to do it for free, you wouldn't do it. Right? So how can we expect people to come here, right, and just work and do the same job over and over and over again if we're not showing them what they're working towards? And if they have a goal, they will go out there and they will bust their butts for you. And they will stay late, or they will go the extra mile, or they will do the things they're not asked to do because they see the goal and they have the taste. But if you keep that from them at a very, very baseline level of effort and buy-in, and that's just what that is.
Yes. And like, I love that you brought this back to like the transactional reality of work. Like, you are giving someone money to do something. So stop pretending like that's not true, first of all.
Yeah.
And I think what in a work context where there's an exchange of goods, and I'm going to come back again to, you talked about this kind of onboarding first conversation, like what are you wanting to get out of this? Like, in that context, people almost never work outside of their perceived good.
Yep.
And so if somebody isn't giving you the response or the reality you want, like you then, as the informable leader, need to step back and say, where is this broken? But like, it should be accessible, because again, like, if somebody's not performing, it actually should be figure outable why.
Yep. And I think that when you really dig and you find out what their ultimate buying motive is, you can appropriately place them in positions that are appropriate for what they want, right? If you are here because you just strictly want a paycheck, because you want to be able to pay the bills and go home and hang out with your kids, that's fine. But I'm telling you up front that I'm not going to put you in a position probably that you're going to climb the ladder in, or that's going to take up a bunch of your free time, or that's going to require you to take a time away from your family. I understand that that's your priority, and I love that for you. But I'm not going to put you in a position where now you regret working here because now I've got you here past 5 o'clock, or I've got you here on a Saturday, or whatever the case may be, or I expect you to go home and work a little bit from home, right? Now, if you come to me and you're like, hey, like legitimately, like, my priority is to climb this ladder as fast as possible, to learn as much, to be you, right?
Mm-hmm.
To teach other people. Okay, right? And you're going to get what you want. You might not like what you get, but you're going to get what you want, right? And and I owe you that, right? And just like I owe the other person who just is like, hey man, I'm just here for 9 to 5, and I want to do a good job, right? But I'm not that interested in going to extra training. I'm not that interested in, that's fine. Yeah. That's what I owe you then, right? Yeah. Because that's the deal we made when we hired you, right? Or when you came into my care, is that's what you get. But that's all I owe you, because that's the conversation that we had, right? And you're allowed to change that too. You're allowed to be like, it definitely absolutely happened to me. Before I had kids, like, I wanted to go up as fast as possible. And I will go anywhere in the country and anywhere in the world, and I will do anything you ask me to do to grow that rank and the paycheck and the accolades and all that. And as soon as I had kids, all of that just went away. And I was like, well, maybe it's time to slow down, right? And I'm allowed to make that change, because like everybody's allowed to make that change, but I owe it to my leadership to be transparent with them about that change, and my leadership owes it to me to tell me what's realistically available to me in that space, if that's what I want. And again, we get into this space where we're likership, like, well, I don't want to tell them that we can't do this because I'm not trying to hurt their feelings. All right, but like, they chose to change their priority, and that's okay. But it's also okay for you to hold them accountable for that choice, right? And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand, and they don't do well, because that's where we see employees who are like, well, this person got this, and this person got that, and this person's getting all this, and blah blah blah, and or they're expecting all this of me, and I just want to go home and hang out with my kids. Okay, but did we have that conversation? Probably not, right? And there are some spaces that you work in that there's no room for that conversation, right? If I'm working at McDonald's or a grocery store or something like that, I know that organization does not care. I know that my leadership in those positions probably does not care or have the power to care. They may care, but they don't have the power to make decisions to help me, right? But if you're in a space where like that is an actual business and is actual room for growth, that is the environment that should be cultivated in that space if you want to be successful.
Well, and I feel like, what we're talking about is individualization. It reminds me a little bit about, from the beginning of the conversation where you were talking about, like, you cannot lead every person the same way. They're not all the same. And I feel like there's so often this pressure, corporate-wise, to say across this org chart, everyone's experience is going to be the same. Like, well, but their effort isn't necessarily the same. Their desire isn't the same. And so I think we've lost a lot of this ability in the corporate sector to even say, like, hey, what are your goals? If your goal is to get here at 9 and leave here at 5 and not check your email at night, that's actually fine. But then you cannot be upset when A or B gets promoted and is doing something different because they were on their email, they were doing the research, they did the professional development, they have stated their goals. Like, we have punished in that space. We've said, in so many senses, we're failing everybody because we're acting like you should do more and you're doing more and you're not getting rewarded for it. And everybody, the organization included, is losing in that space because we're unwilling to just say, what are you trying to get out of this? Because not everybody wants the same thing.
Yep. And I think that's where we have failed in the human resources spaces, because it's gone so far to like just hiring, firing, benefits, numbers, right? And like, your job as a human resources professional is to be cultivating those relationships for your employer, right? You are to be the bridge, because your employer may not have the time to have these conversations with these people, but you do, and that's your job. And so you see so many times people are like, oh, HR is horrible. Like, we have a horrible reputation, right? And it's because we've created that. Like, we've created a connection between HR and being fired, or HR and losing my pension, HR not getting a raise this year, right? And if we were having those honest conversations, they would still be difficult, but they'd be understandable, right? When I do a annual review on you and I rate you amongst your peers and be like, hey, out of the 8 people that work in this building, you're number 4. And, well, why? How can you say that? All right, that's fine. I'm willing to change it if you come back to me in an hour with proof as to why I should change it. And every time I do that, they come sulking back in about an hour and a half later, and they're like, I can't find anything. Like,
yeah, I know.
Okay, got it, right? And so right there, we've taught that person to be like, oh, well, I earned the ranking that I got, right? I earned, not necessarily by doing bad things, but maybe not doing enough, right? Mm-hmm. And so when that's part of holding people accountable is like, I love hard enumeration. I think it is the end all be all. I think there is no room for argument. If I tell you like, hey, you're doing a pretty good job, that doesn't tell them anything, right? And I'm like, hey, you're number 4 out of 8. You're not the worst, not the best. You're number 4. And here are the reasons why. Bang, 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 right? And like, and if you're upset about it, I'm more than willing to change it. But you have to convince me. And I've never had one person come back and with anything tangible. It just never happened. So like, when we look at stuff like that, everybody knows what the expectation is, and you know that you are working to earn your spot at the table.
Yeah, and like tell me, and like I'm going to come back to what you said about your boss and a phone call 2 hours later. Like I actually think across the people I know and have led and have worked beside, the clarity of that is desired.
Yep.
And I think that, you know, if you weren't just like, meets expectation, good job again. Like, if your
Yep.
annual review has looked the same more than 1 year in a row, and you're like, I don't know if that makes sense. Like, I'd actually really love for you to say that out of an organization of 30, I am 22. And like, and again, was that different than last year and why? Like, I think so much of the reason why annual reviews get a bad rap is because we know they're not real.
Yep.
Like, this is an excuse to either tell me something I didn't know this is the wrong time to tell me. Like, that is terrible leadership. And I have said this once before and I will say it another time. Your annual review is not a time for a surprise. So, assuming it
Yep.
is not a surprise, it's either raised or lowered, and why? And like, how can I see that grow? Or did I acknowledge I'm going to go back to school, so I actually am going to cut back the way I've been over delivering, and I can actually chart or track that? Like, that's an annual review people can get on board with because it's not performative. And so I think that so much of this concept, and I appreciate you taking one for the field of HR, because people think about they've demonized this concept of a review or an annual review largely because it's illegitimate.
Yep. Yep. Well, and when you're not, if the expectations are not set ahead of time, then I don't know what you want, and when I get 365 days later, right?
Yeah.
So, like, in my opinion, you should have that annual review, but you should also have a quarterly check-in, right? So we've had that first conversation. You got hired. This is where this is what my expectations are. I would like to know what your expectations are as your leadership, right? I know this is what you want to be. This is where you want to end up. If you want to end up here, this is what I need you to do. And I
Yeah.
promise you that if you do these things, and you do this at this level, you will be there by this time, right? 3 months later, hey, you're not on track. This is what you told me 3 months ago, but we're not there, right?
Yeah.
So this is what I need you to do in addition to all the first conversation to get back on track. Now we go 6 months later. Hey, you're there. We are on the right path. We are there, right? And then 9 months later, hey, you keep this up in 3 months at your annual review, like, you're going to get that promotion is going to be there, that position is going to be there, that rate, whatever the case may be. And when we get there, it's okay. In the last 3 months, did you hold the line or did you not?
Yeah.
Right. And if you did, here is the reward that comes with that. And if you did not, here are my bullet points of where I think that you can do better. And we can revisit this in another 3 months. Right. But that transparency just doesn't happen. And so that's what you get people who come in for the end of the year. They go to talk to HR and they're like, yeah, you're not receiving a raise this year. Well, why? So you didn't do what we wanted you. Well, you didn't tell me what you wanted me to do. That's fine. Get out. Right.
Yep.
And that's what this has become. And so the bad rap comes from just a lack of communication, a lack of transparency, and a lack of accountability on the organization's part. And a lot of times I think that HR gets blamed for stealing the autonomy of the leadership to give feedback for their employees. Because you have a lot of leaders in organizations who are good leaders, and they do believe in their employees, and they see the good things they're doing, and they report those things. And the head of the organization goes, well, I don't care. And here's my HR person, torch them, right?
Yeah.
And so then it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And
Yeah.
so every step has to be accountable, right?
Yeah.
And every position has to be accountable, and have to answer to each other. And it's all connected, like you said before. And I think going forward, I would hope going forward, at least stewards of this profession, the HR profession, understand that and learn that a little bit better. I find it hard to find people who really understand these concepts who weren't in the military, because they just don't, and that's not nobody's fault, right? But you just don't understand what it's like to try to cultivate these people when you haven't been inside of every nook and cranny of their life.
Yeah.
And then call yourself, a performative leader. It's very hard for me to get around that, but I do understand that, like, that's just, the military is a 1% space of the population, right? So we have to kind of try to bridge that gap and do the best we can with what we have.
We are at time, but I have one more question if you have a minute.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so this is, if you're speaking to a leader who is like, yes, 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 Zachary, thank you, this is great, this is great. What is your advice to them on how to handle like a habitual underperformer? Somebody who is, say, like, not just I'm here to do 9 to 5, I value my family time, but like really someone who is not meeting that standard.
Yeah. So I think it depends on what the history was before they weren't making the standard, right? If you have somebody who's just not making it from day one, like, that answer is very easy. Like I'll find somebody else, right?
Yeah.
That's fine, because um you haven't asked for help. And I think that's a teaching point too, because a lot of people don't know or are afraid to ask for help. And I am 100% one of those people, right?
Okay.
So, like, and I had to eat it just last week, right? I was struggling with some things at work, and I reached out to somebody, and he used to be my subordinate, which now he switched over to the officer side of the house, so now technically he's one of my leaders, right? And he said, "You used to do this to me all the time." He goes, "You used to expect that I know what I was doing, and you would give me a job, and you would just walk away." He's like, "You have to be able to ask for help." And I was like, all right. So I asked one of my leaders for help, and he was like, "Oh, okay." Right. And this is somebody who had been yelling at me all week. Right. And he's like, "All right, like, cool." He's like, "Now that you asked, this changes the dynamic of this relationship, and it changes the dynamic of our professional relationship and where we're going with this." Right. So I think people are afraid to ask, but if you find that they're not afraid to ask, they're just not asking because they don't want to ask, because they don't want to be better, that's easy. Like, I will just find somebody who will. However, I think if you have somebody who is a high performer, and they've been a consistent high performer, and then suddenly they are not, that almost 100% means that something is going on at home.
Yeah.
And so instead of using work to dictate how we handle that, it's got to be, and you don't owe me answers. You don't have to tell me anything, right?
Yeah.
But you do have to let me know if there's something going on that is out of my control and out of my workspace, right? Because typically, if you have high performers that they've never been late, they're always on time, they're always freaking doing everything they can, going above and beyond, and suddenly they're not, something happened, right? And that doesn't mean that person is forever going to be a bad employee. It just means that life happens to all of us, right? And so I think it comes with a conversation and some development. And some people develop faster than others. And if you have the time and you have the resources to be able to cultivate that, you owe that to them. And we don't always have the time for everybody. There are some people where, like, I don't got 10 years, right? So, like, we're gonna have to find somewhere else for you, right? But, like, most people with the right amount of care can come up through that.
Yeah.
And I think we owe them, and that's not only owing them a conversation in person, but it's also, the pen is mightier than the sword in most cases, right? So, like, if I'm putting these things on black and white, we're probably gonna get you there, right? Or at least you get to hold yourself accountable using, things that are on paper. And that's gonna weed most of those problems out, in my opinion.
Well, and I think it, like, what we're talking, bravery, we've talked about the need to be honest. We've talked about the need to be able to not be liked. I think what we're also talking about is, you got to get through the discomfort of, like, literally telling someone, like, hey, you're not really performing. And it's not because you can't, we've seen you. So you don't have to tell me what's going on, but I do need to know how to help, how to create a space where you feel like you can do your job well. Like, it is like a leader needs to be able to be uncomfortable to lead their people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important too that subordinates have a space to rate their leaders as well, and their peers. I'm a big fan of peer reviews. Obviously there can be some like drama and stuff that happens with stuff like that, but like you take a percentage of that out for stuff like that. And then you have, leadership reviews too, where they can be anonymous. I do that with our team too. At the end of every season, I send them a questionnaire, and it's completely honest, and they can absolutely drag us over the coals if they want as coaches. Like, I like this, I hated this, I think you're this, blah blah blah, right? Whatever the case may be, but they deserve to have those spaces to let us know so that I can be better for them, right? As long as it's not something that's like face value crazy, but
Yeah.
and they deserve it too. We have them do peer reviews on each other too. Like, I think you did a really good job on this, but I think you work on this. And when people look at that, like, they may get upset at first, but after a while they start paging through it again. Be like, well, my peers think this, and my leadership thinks this. It's probably this.
Yeah.
Right. So like, and when you empower people in that way with their own misgivings, they will find a way to fix it on their own. You don't really have to do a lot.
Well, no, I mean, I think what you're talking about is a structure for intrinsic motivation and improvement, where I think people are like, well, you can't create intrinsic motivation. Like, no, you can if you're uncomfortable, but helping people understand that the reality of the space around them can create a space where they say, I don't want to be in that position again. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want someone to say that about me. So how am I going to show up? Am I going to be on time? Am I going to be kind? Am I going to be helpful? Am I going to be self-aware of the realities I bring to a space? Like, those are intrinsic responses to an external reality.
Yep. One of the most important quotes that as somebody's ever said to me, and it's so simple, but I don't know, it just sticks to me all the time, is I had a leader one time that came to me and he was like, we're learning together. And I was like, what do you mean we're learning together? He's like, we are learning together. He's like, yes, I may know all these things and I am your leader, but like, we are learning together. And I will never forget that, because one, like, you are bringing yourself to my level, right? And so that gives me a level of comfort, right? Especially if you have an intense leader. And it also gives me buy-in to what we're building together, whatever it is, right? No matter who you work for, we're all learning together. And I think as long as our subordinates know that, you really develop a special connection there, and we're all in the same boat, right? We're floating towards the same direction. I may be the captain, but we could all sink too, very easily. So, like, it's just we have to understand that connection.
We are over time, but I do think mostly that is just a really great place to end. So I am so thankful for your time. This was such a helpful conversation to me, but I am sure it will be to others also. So thank you so much for who you are and how you lead, and for taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Have a great night and a great weekend.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.